have gathered as women at the Seneca Army Depot to challenge the nuclear threat represented by the weapons stored here. We have come to stop their deployment. As first strike weapons, they lead us one step closer to planetary annihilation.
Yeah.
Because there were so many.
Well, I was looking for it, but I couldn't find one. Okay. And then there's we took one of the songs from one of the stories from the film. That was the army woman who was, and so we'll talk about that, and then we'll close out and then bring on the other guests. And so when I say, okay, time to get off, you'll don't forget to unplug yourselves. And yeah, and just put it on the chair so the new people.
And then where do we go?
And then you can go and watch from the other room. And somebody, I don't know if they'll want. Yeah, see if they'll let you in. I'm just listening to him saying 5 seconds. I just was.
Where would we go if we didn't go there?
Paul, can they go in the control room afterwards to watch? It might be better to not
Yeah, that part. I don't
stressful in there.
want to step on something.
There goes the sound.
There goes Martha. Welcome to Dead Air Live. We have a show about extraordinary women who have done an extraordinary effort to keep alive the HeRSTory of the Women's Encampment for the Future of Peace and Justice, which took place in upstate New York starting in the summer of 1983. This program is doubly meaningful to me because I was a participant in the Peace Camp as a member of the Women's Video Collective, and we'll be talking to members of that group later. And in addition, I am also an alumni of the Somerville Producers Group and used to work on this show back in the 1980s. But I really want to focus on what these women have done at the Peace Camp and in preserving the archives of video, audio, and photographs, as well as women's oral histories from their experience. So first of all, I want to introduce Woody Blue. Welcome. I'm very happy to have you here from Gainesville, Florida.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Estelle Coleman, for coming here and for also putting this project together with Hershey, who unfortunately is not able to be here tonight. Starting with you, Estelle, why did you decide that this thing that happened more than 30 years ago, although it's extended over time, was worth preserving and going to a lot of effort to save?
I think that we saw it as having been such a transforming part of our lives, and that other women around us were talking about it being transforming to their lives, that we recognized it as a unique phenomena that needed to be documented, and that women's stories are frequently erased, made invisible, and we were determined that women had some really fabulous stories to tell, and we wanted that saved for posterity, for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, and we wanted those stories to be in the Library of Congress someday. So we decided that nobody else was doing it. We did a little research, and there wasn't even a whole lot on women in peace in the Library of Congress. And much as we've managed to get our stuff into the Schlesinger Library, that's a great step, and it's just absolutely fascinating what women who are at the encampment have done with their lives, how many things from the encampment carried into the future. What we learned there was just in so many different areas of our lives.
Well, let me ask Woody, for a lot of people don't even remember what the Women's Encampment was, and it's got a long title, Women's Encampment for a Future of Peace and Justice, so it encompassed a lot of things. But what exactly was it? Why did a bunch of women decide to gather in this small town of Romulus in upstate New York, and then ended up staying in some form or another for over 20 years, but really focused that first year in 1983 on a particular mission related to peace?
Well, previous to my being there, I had been kind of searching around, so I don't know what the common experience was for most of the women, but I think in my experience, it was, during the years of the women's liberation movement and things like that, women were coming into their power, but they were also being stymied a lot. As for myself, I had been in engineering for a while, and every day was difficult just because it was a male-dominated field. I wasn't in at the Corps at the very beginning, but when I got there, I was there. Like Estelle said, it was a huge transition for me. As soon as I got there, I could feel empowered, I felt empowered, and I stayed with the camp because I grew exponentially.
Well, I think that's a lot of people had that experience, which people can find out what that was like for people if they go to your blog site, right? So we will post that in a little bit of where they can go to find out more. And they can also look for the HeRSTory happenings this weekend. We have a couple of flyers that hopefully in the control room they'll be able to pull them up so we can talk about what's happening this weekend so people can find out how it's being celebrated. But I do know that on Friday, the tapes and the photos and everything that you have collected is going to be accepted by the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe. So that's a huge honor, and that means people who do women's studies and peace studies in the future will have a place to go to find out what happened there in Romulus. Can you tell us a little bit, Estelle, about what's going to happen on Saturday?
On Saturday, we're broadcasting in Copley Square a play by Sorrel Hayes. And we're going to be kind of including people in building a huge web. Part of the idea of how we are all connected and how if something happens on one line, it's felt by all the people who might be on various other lines of the web.
Yeah.
So it's a play, an interesting play that was done with women's voices at the Peace Camp, both at Seneca and then at Greenham Common. And Seneca is another word for the Peace Encampment. Anyhow, it's an interesting story that Sorrel wrote and incorporated some of the songs and definitely the voices and some of the, I think, little episodes in people's lives.
I think if people look for the Peace Encampment HeRSTory project on the website, what they'll do is find specific details about where to go when on Saturday and on Sunday, because on Sunday, I know a number of the films, including, we'll see clips from some of the films tonight, but a number of films will be shown at the Regent Underground Theater, and that will be very exciting. That's from 1 to 5 at the Regent Theater in Arlington. And so we'll try to post more information about that as the show goes on.
Also on Saturday, there's an exhibit at the Community Church of Boston, which is right across from Copley Square.
Right.
And we will have tons of pictures, lots of historical documents, and we'll be showing some lots of TVs
Yeah.
and playing different.
Okay, and
Being
that I
family.
see will be from 1 to 5 at the Community Church of Boston at 565 Boylston Street on
Right.
Saturday, so that will be great. Just to get back to the whole impetus for the peace encampment, my understanding when I went there was that over in Europe, there had been some activism against the placement of cruise and Pershing II missiles. It's all part of the Cold War, where the U.S. had lots of missiles pointed at Russia. Russia had lots pointed at us. Europe was, threatened with being caught in the crossfire. So there were a lot of women, especially, who were leading the charge there. And if we have a tape, one of the most famous encampments over in Europe was called Greenham Common. And what would be great is if we could roll the tape that has some of the songs that will give you some of the flavor of what the Greenham Common event was like that inspired the Seneca Women's Peace Encampment. And while they're getting that tape ready, I should say that after a lot of the Greenham Common women came over and got women here inspired to we've got to stop because the Seneca Army Depot, right in the town of Romulus, is where these missiles were, or people believed they were, that were going over, right? And so these women bought 52 acres of land right near the Army Depot to have this encampment. People came, it was this big muddy field, and then they were camping out, no electricity, very primitive, but people not only survived, but thrived there. So I would love to show, if they have it, some of the Greenham Common footage. But they're still looking for that. So,
I'd like to add that the first summer that the encampment was working, July 4th to Labor Day, 12,000 women came through the camp.
Wow.
950 women were arrested. And I came for the August 6th action. Like I said, when I got on that land, looking around the land, there were boardwalks being made, there were canopies stretched over poles where workshops were ongoing to teach women how to form affinity groups, how to learn how to do consensus decision making, how to do civil disobedience, what to expect, doing arrest scenarios so that they wouldn't be freaked out when that was happening.
Right.
It was all women. And like I said, I was just bowled over. All of these were strong women who were finding their own voice and their own power and being allowed to do that.
it's amazing when there's no man around to say, how do I fix this? How do I build that? Those of us who are socialized, into just have to say, I don't know how to, I can't handle tools, but here you came as a carpenter, and I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. But I guess they have the Greenham Common tape ready to go. So let's play Greenham Common.
Down at Greenham on a spree, financed by the KGB. Dirty women squatters in the mud, la 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 la. Mostly vegetarian when we're not devouring men. Foreigners and other forms of scum. Mr. Andropov supplies us with our vodka. Mr. Castro makes sure we're kept in dope, I wish he would. Most of us are outside agitators who can't see that Mr. Reagan brings us hope. Brings us hope. What a bunch of layabouts, don't know what it's all about. How we need deterrence for the best. La 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 la, lighting fires and burning toes, bringing communism close, threatening the safety of the West.
Welcome back to the studio. We're talking with Estelle Coleman and Woody Blue about the Women's Encampment for a Future of Peace and Justice. The footage you just saw was from Greenham Common, which was the predecessor to the Women's Encampment in upstate New York. And Woody, I wanted to ask you, I think you have a fabulous story about how you actually ended up at the encampment, because it was kind of accidental.
It was. I was at the time upstate New York, in the Adirondacks, close to the Canadian border, and I was working as an apprentice carpenter for somebody who was homesteading. And there were other people in that area that had apprentices. And one day there was a woman who came up and she called all of us together for a meeting, and she told us about the encampment. And she said, we've got to go down there. It's just amazing. Well, these women are doing all this stuff, da 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 da. Well, yeah, it got our interest. So 10 of us got together, and we decided to form an affinity group. We made a banner, and we went down for the August 6th action, and I stayed for 10 days. The other women went home after 3 days, but it had a huge effect on me. Well, the following year, I was again going up to the Adirondacks to do another summer of apprentice carpentry. And I was coming from Cleveland, Ohio. And I had tried to contact the women's encampment, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. So I stopped in on my way up to the upstate New York. And it was around dinner time, 5:36. They were in a meeting. And so I had to wait to ask them what was going on for the summer, because I just wanted to know their summer calendar. Well, when they came out of the meeting, I could ask them that, and they were loosely putting together a calendar and everything like that, and they had asked me if I wanted to stay for dinner, and I did. And so while we were hanging out and talking, they were saying, well, they asked me what I was doing, and I explained I was being an apprentice carpenter. And they all just were totally amazed, because in the meeting, they had to build 3 outhouses, and they had to fill, the cement truck was coming at 7 o'clock in the morning on Monday, and it was a Friday at this time, Friday evening, and they didn't have anyone to build those forms. So they had actually done a ritual in the meeting to bring carpenters to the Peace Camp. They came out of the meeting, and I was an apprentice carpenter. So they were like, you're here. And I'm like, no, I'm just getting information, and I have my summer planned. But because these women were so empowering and everything like that, and friendly, I decided to stay and help them for Monday morning.
Right. They said basically that the goddesses had sent you, because what they needed was a carpenter, or they couldn't build these outhouses, and who should show up at their doorstep?
Not even, I showed up before they even got out of the meeting. The goddess worked like that.
Yeah. Well, I think there were a lot of those kind of stories, and it also was, to me, incredibly impressive to see women doing things like building wheelchair ramps and digging ditches and laying pipes. And, you know, when we came out as the Women's Video Collective, suddenly we have to figure out how to deal with this funky equipment in the middle of nowhere with no one else to ask. So wasn't that, Estelle, one of the more empowering things, was how you had to figure things out for yourself out there?
Absolutely. And the daring do of it.
Yeah.
I remember at one point the gas stove wasn't working, and somebody said, well, it needs to get fixed. And I looked at some Danish woman and I said, do you know anything about gas lines? She said, no. I said, well, neither do I, but I think we have to do it. And just trying to trace the line and figure out where does it come in, and where's the leak, and where's, you know, and how. And eventually getting the stove fixed and working, and so things you would never have thought to do, you sometimes found yourself in a position of doing.
Well, you know, one of the things, and those are many, many other stories, and we want to roll to one more story that's from your HeRSTory project with an Army woman, actually, who was at the Seneca Army Depot. So if they're ready to roll that tape, we'll go to the Army woman to hear what her story was about the peace encampment.
Stationed over at Seneca Army Depot, and we were in orientation, because when I first arrived at the post, they gave us a talk about where we were allowed to be and where we weren't allowed to be, and that was standard protocol at any duty station you were at. And they mentioned the PeaCe camp. I was with a group of men, and they were, the first sergeant come out, and I don't want to catch no soldiers. And he points at me, he goes, especially you that are over there at the camp. And he goes, and when we have protesters out here, we'll need extra troops to support. And he goes, I'll never ask you. And I thought, I wonder why me? So it made me curious about what was this. And that's the first thing I did when I got off post, is I went over there to see what was going on.
Welcome back to the studio. My name is Laura Barrett. This is Dead Air Live. If you're just tuning in, I'm talking to two women about the Women's Encampment for the Future of Peace and Justice and the HeRSTory project, which was a project to archive memories from the Peace Encampment so that future generations can find out what happened there. We're just about done with our time here. Again, I want to emphasize to people to go to the the HeRSTory project, the Peace Encampment HeRSTory project blog post, and if they Google those words in that order, this is the only thing that will come up, and they will find out all the activities that are happening this weekend to celebrate the Peace Encampment. I want to thank you both very much for being here. Do you have any parting thoughts about what you would advise people if they're ever faced with an opportunity to do something like this? Is it something you ever regretted doing, or you just...
I was involved with the Peace Encampment till 1991, 1983 to 1991. There was a lot of hard stuff that was going on. It was very risky. Opposing the government was, a big thing. And I don't have any regrets. I learned, and I got stronger all the time. I'd say go for it.
Absolutely. I don't need to add anything.
Yeah.
You said it all.
But I think I've been getting signaled that we have a little more time in this segment. And so one thing I want to talk about is... Okay, actually we are ready to roll out, and we're going to go to the next segment and introduce two new guests. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Women at the Seneca Army Depot to challenge the nuclear threat represented by the weapons stored here. We have come to stop their deployment. As first strike weapons, they lead us one step closer to planetary annihilation.
Welcome back to the studio. My name is Laura Barrett, and we're doing a program on the HeRSTory project and the Women's Video Collective, and this is for Dead Air Live in Somerville, Massachusetts. My first guest and old friend is Judy Kellerman, and next to her is Nancy Clover, two of my comrades in arms with the Women's Video Collective back in 1983. Judy, what made you so crazy that you decided it was an okay thing to do to go to this encampment in upstate New York, an 8-hour drive away, a thing that would cost you money instead of making you money at a time when I'm sure none of us had any money? Why'd you go there?
That's true. Money certainly wasn't the object at all. It's one of those things that I think happens in your life, and if it happens, it's a wonderful thing, when you just know it's something that you need to do for yourself. But I think all of us would agree that it was something that became bigger than just something for ourselves. And it was so meaningful to us as a group to do the process that we did to achieve the means that we wanted to. And to be present at the Peace Camp, I think, changed all of us in many ways.
So Nancy, you've described yourself as the proverbial sort of innocent, the straight woman who suddenly finds herself. What was that? You said you were a good Catholic girl, and you show up at this camp where there were many alternative people. There were people who described themselves as witches. There were, all kinds of very, very left politics, very anti the patriarchy, and here you were, a married woman. I mean, what were your thoughts when you showed up there?
Well, I was 23, so I was kind of young. And I came from a straight Catholic family who, I went to Catholic school. And I'm really glad that we got a chance to go to the Peace Encampment early. So we went a couple of times as a video collective, went a couple of times as they were getting the camp set up. So it gave me some exposure to some of the lifestyle things that were going to be different for me. Because if I had come August 1st for the first time, I wouldn't have left. It was so overwhelming to me to have so many different people. I just hadn't been exposed to that kind of stuff.
Can you describe, Judy, what happened on August 1st? I mean, there were some civil disobedience actions that occurred. There was people going over the fence, and what was that all about at the Army Depot?
every day there was a different activity that was going on, and I think mostly it was the women themselves who made those decisions. Individual groups of women would get together during the day, during the morning, the day before, and decide on what action they wanted to do. Some of them came to the camp, already knew what they wanted to do, had brought things to take to the Army base, to hang on the fence. We photographed a lot of that. So it was, sort of an amazing array of different things that went on each day.
And Nancy, you were there with your camera photographing it all, and if Charlie's back in the control room, at some point it would be great if he could play a slide while you're talking, the slideshow we have of some of your photographs, as well as we have them hanging up here, including, a woman dressed up as, I don't know, Susan B. Anthony or one of her
No, Matilda Gage.
Oh, Matilda Gage, sorry.
Yes, Matilda Gage.
And then she goes under the fence.
Yeah.
So if they can hear us in the control room at some point, it'd be great if they would run those slides. While you describe why you took photographs and what that meant for you.
Yeah. Well, I was invited to come. I had been photographing the Somerville Producers Group, and when Martha Mollison came in and said, "Oh, we're looking for women to come and take photographs of to videotape and get the word out about the peace encampment," I thought I had no part of that. And Claire Beach was the one that said, "Nancy, you got to come and photograph." So I brought 2 cameras, one for black and white and one for color slides, having no idea what we were going to do with these things at the time. And I thought I was just going to be documenting the Women's Video Collective making the thing. But once you get up there, how can you not be sucked into the actions and the artistry and the amazing things that these women were doing? So we ended up taking lots of photos and making a slideshow presentation out of it that was able, because at the time, if you remember, video couldn't go over to Europe because it was a different format. So the slideshow that Dorothy Emerson helped put together and actually wrote the whole thing, put it all together, was able to go over to Europe so they could show what we were doing at Seneca.
And Judy, it's interesting that we went there to document the actions, but at some point you become a participant as well as a documenter when you're sleeping in the fields in a tent, and you're eating the same zucchini day after day that everybody's eating. And was that at all a conflict for you? Like, did you ever wonder, am I a participant? Am I an observer? What am I?
I think it was something that, again, we all chose to participate on our own levels and not as a group necessarily. I remember there would be a moment in the morning sometime where someone would say, "Now look, if anybody doesn't want to videotape today and wants to participate in an action or go to a nonviolence prep meeting or go to a discussion group meeting or whatever, you're free to do that." So we allowed ourselves to be part of the camp as much as we wanted to be, and I think that really helped our work in a sense. And I think it helped people trust us, because media in those days was mainstream media pretty much. And here we were, a group of kind of ragtag women, again, not doing it for the money. We had a lot of our equipment and tapes donated to us by many places in New York and in Boston, so special thanks to all those people out there. But our goal was to document as much as we could of what was going on, and then to take those tapes back to Boston. We had a dubbing station set up in the barn, and we would make copies for anybody that wanted a copy of anything, and then they could take it back to their hometown and play it in their church or in their community center or on their cable station.
So we get back to Cambridge and start showing some of the footage, and it was just raw footage we had, and we didn't really know what we were going to do with the raw footage. We just thought we should show it and perhaps tell the story of what happened from there with that footage.
There was a gentleman who had come to one of our screenings, and he had a production under his belt. He was a radio producer initially, and he was now producing a series about the nuclear arms race. He'd already collected a number of videos from around the world. He came up to us and he said, "I'd love to include something. Do you think you could make something in 3 months?" And we all said, "Of course," not knowing that we could do this or not do this, but we did manage to do it and spent 3 months 24/7 in people's living rooms and donated spaces going through all of our footage. I counted at one point we had 80 tapes of raw footage, and I can't even multiply the hours that we had. And it was a tremendous, again, that was a tremendous experience, I think, for all of us, many of us who had never done this kind of work in that capacity before.
And I want to give a big shout out to Linda Rubin, who's not here. She's off in California, but she was perhaps the most experienced in video of any of us, and especially in editing. And so Linda really took the bull by the horns and said, okay, we've got to put this together and whip the show together. And we will show you a little more footage of that. From Bella Abzug came one night, and I remember, were you there when Claire got us all to like, Bella Abzug's here, we're all exhausted, and and there's no lights, and so she's like, but get your cameras out, and we do, and we caught some footage of her. Yeah. Fortunately, there was a TV station there that had the lights, and so we said, we're glom onto their lights, we'll take whatever. So we'll show that in a couple of minutes, and also from, but we got a lot of footage of ordinary people in their daily life, which, that's what it was all about. And in fact, in looking over our old tape footage, we realized that we didn't put names of people, even like Congresswoman Bella Abzug and whatnot, and because we thought everybody's equal, nobody should be identified as being special and important. Of course, now as historians, it's unfortunate there's a few, including a clip of a woman we're going to show who was a fabulous professor, but I don't know her name, but we'll still have her footage that we can show you because she had a lot to say when we go to that tape. So what did you take away, Nancy, from it all? Like, how did it change your life, or did it change your life?
Well, first of all, it educated me about the nuclear arms race because I really hadn't even heard of that before. So that was the first thing. But I'm going to give a shout out to Claire Beach because the thing that she taught me was the process. And during the time we were doing the video collective, every time she said process, I groaned because it just was just miserable to me. I mean, I was a person of action. I saw an issue and I just dealt with it. Here you had to go through the process. And now as a business owner, I use the process all the time because it's the quiet people have a voice in the system, and they often have the voice of reason. So I use the process all the time. So Claire, wherever you are, you're fabulous.
And it wasn't just the Women's Video Collective that followed a lot of process. The whole Peace Encampment, Judy, had a whole consensus model, which also could drive you crazy because if you know what consensus model is, it means any one person can actually block consensus. So it's not majority rules and everybody votes. So you could talk, there was a lot of talk. Like, describe what some of those meetings were like when you're trying to reach a decision.
Very long. But what, again, even if we were just videotaping it, I think what I took away from that was how important that was. And I'd never experienced anything like that before. Again, in our school systems or, family units, whatever, there's a hierarchy and there's a right and a wrong and this is how this works and that sort of thing. And this was a very different process, and I think everybody experienced a real sense of, what I say is important. And I think a lot of women in particular hadn't felt that way before. Yeah. As videographers, we were already every day, I think, gaining a lot of respect for ourselves and the accomplishments that we could do. Right. As people have said all along, it's an industry that was dominated by men, just because that's the way it was for a long time. We were in the 1980s, kind of on the forefront of, not only teaching ourselves but other women at the camp.
Right.
That video was an accessible media.
I think one of the amazing things about the Peace Encampment that it wasn't just ideas that people were talking about or putting down on paper or writing a book about, but they were actually just living them. Yeah. And it had to be that, everybody was pulling together. It really was a collective. Yeah. We were a collective as a women's video collective, but the whole Peace Encampment was a collective. And everybody had to pull their weight or you don't eat, right. And it just seemed right. But also the collective and the difficult collective decisions to do some political actions that became at some points very unpopular with the local townspeople. And I don't know if you remember some of that, like marching along. And Nancy, do you have some memories of, opposition from the, not all, obviously there were some very supportive local right. townspeople, but it's always the vocal minority that can make some trouble.
I remember the issue of the flag.
Yeah.
When a flag was given to the Peace Encampment and the question was, should we fly an American flag? Or is that really a symbol of us? And those discussions went on for a very long time. And I'm not 100% sure I'm right, but I think what they decided was that they would make lots of flags, and all the flags would be shown, and that was part of the whole. We started the flags, and there were lots of flags at the peace encampment.
That's right. I think everybody could make their own flag or their own symbols, and it could incorporate images of the American flag or not,
exactly.
or be like some of these beautiful quilts by Estelle that are behind us. I mean, that could have been a flag. I mean, it's and whatever. They had a lot of other interesting symbolism. There was a lot of weaving and weaving the web. What did that mean to you, Judy?
Again, just the gathering together of everybody's thoughts and hopes and dreams and opinions, no matter what the discussion was. The fact, as you said earlier, of all of us pulling our own weight and pitching in and making things happen. It was just a very, it was a camaraderie that existed there. And it wasn't something that you had to learn. It is something inside of all of us. Most of us don't have that opportunity. So to experience that kind of thing. And I think that, as Nancy said, it's carried through in all of our lives. I think we all could recount many instances where we can look back at our experience at the Peace Camp and see how we've incorporated things that we learned about ourselves and about, living a good life, whatever way we can.
So it's pretty exciting
Stems
that our
from there.
footage and your photographs are all going to be at the Schlesinger Library at
So
Radcliffe.
cool.
And that it's really wonderful that Hershey and Estelle and others have collected this laboriously, as well as the stories, so that people can learn from the future. What do you think they will learn from if they decided to take any lessons from this? What would be the lessons that they could learn from that, either of you?
The power of women, I think, is really, and how we are all connected. And that's the web thing to me, was how we were all connected and our actions all reflected, had a domino effect on other people.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not about just being out there for yourself. It's about realizing that everybody that you know supports you, and you support everybody that you know. And that sounds like a Hallmark card, but I don't mean it like that, because it really is true. All of those connections that you make in your life are so important. Again, look at this. How many years ago? What are we counting? 30-something?
32.
32, thank you.
Yep.
We're still here, and it's as if we were back then together, and there's a really strong bond that we made. So yeah, and we have a wonderful guest in our next segment. I can't wait to that.
All the way from
happens.
Australia?
All the way from Australia.
Yep.
And who's, I believe, watching us now. And thank you to her for starting this. I really want to say that. So
For starting the Women's Video Collective,
Absolutely.
aspect of the whole thing.
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think we didn't know what we were doing, but then again, you have to invent yourselves over and over again. And I think that's what we did, and that was one of the beauties of the PeaCe eNCaMPMeNT and the Women's Video Collective. I'm looking forward to the activities this weekend, and again, I don't know if they have the URL that they can put up on the screen, but if they don't, I think if people will Google PeaCe eNCaMPMeNT HeRSTory project, you'll be able to find out just what you need to find out about this weekend's activities, including the full screenings of the films, which that you will see some footage of in tonight's program. And they are, and also obviously there'll be photographs displayed and other things. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. As we move to the next portion, I'm going to be introducing the next clip is of Congresswoman Bella Abzug from upstate New York, and this professor whose name we didn't record because we were thinking everybody was equal who needed names. So, but she has some great footage. So if we have that ready, let's roll the tape.
Encampments have done a very brave thing in coming here and trying to bring attention to the necessity of the very serious conflict which exists with the, a serious expanding nuclear arms race which threatens the very survival of humanity itself. And I think women have to take a leading role in that. We don't have much power in the decision-making in governments, whether in this government or in the Soviet Union or other places, but we have the power of numbers, and we have the power of our nurturing feelings, and we have the power of our belief in survival, and this is what this is about.
Chinese have a proverb, women hold up half the heavens, and we know that women are more than half the world. And part of what we're trying to do as women at the PeaCe encampment at Seneca, at Greenham, at Comiso, at many, many places around the world, we're trying to marshal the energies of women to transform the world.
Welcome back to the studio. My name is Laura Barrett. You've tuned in to Dead Air Live, produced by the Somerville Producers Group, and our program is about the Women's Peace Encampment and the HeRSTory project to record and preserve oral histories, video, and photographs of women who participated in the Women's Encampment for a Future of Peace and Justice back in 1983, and it extended on in one form or another for more than 20 years, but the main number of people came in the early 80s. I have a couple of wonderful guests with me. One of them is my good friend Claire Beach, all the way here from Seattle to visit friends and family and, of course, to participate in the Peace Encampment. And then now, miraculously, I think we have Martha Mollison. If people can see Martha, it is something like 10 in the morning for Martha tomorrow, if that makes any sense, because she is in Australia. And Martha, I want to talk to you first, and because that'll prove to me that you can actually hear me, and say hi from Massachusetts. Can you hear us?
I can definitely hear you, and good morning from Wednesday in Australia.
It's so wonderful to see you and hear from you, and we've all credited you with getting us in the Women's Video Collective to the Peace Encampment. Who was this crazy woman, Martha Mollison, who came to the producers group and to any place where a group of women gathered? How did you hear about it, and why did you decide that we needed to videotape it?
Well, this is really interesting. When I think back about it, it was my 35th birthday, and as a celebration, I went to hear "Sweet Honey in the Rock," and this would have been February 26th, 1983. And at "Sweet Honey in the Rock," people were passing out leaflets saying there's going to be this peace encampment, and I had been wondering, like, what I was doing on this planet, like, why am I here? And I looked at that leaflet, and it said, that's why you're here, because you have these video skills, and no big media organization, no TV channel is going to cover this. It has to be covered. Get together a group. Camping was easy for me. I love camping. So to go camp in a cornfield was not daunting. To do video in a cornfield was tricky because we had to recharge the batteries and everything, but we learned how to do that. So that people were already organizing the Peace Camp, and they were at Sweet Honey in the Rock passing out these leaflets. I had been already training in video with this crew with Dead Air Live. I want to send out my thanks to Charlie Tesh, who taught me how to edit, and I felt I have these skills. What am I going to do with them? Why am I here? This is it. This is it. It just spoke to me. So I went and I told Claire and I told everybody. I told everybody. And they did.
So Claire, that's a wonderful story. Claire, you got a lot of us going there in your little red VW, of which we do have a photo, and we have photos of all of you folks from 1983. If the control room has access to those and can post some of those, that would be wonderful, because we would love to see photographs. But you had this little red vehicle with a convertible.
PeaceMobile, we called it.
A PeaceMobile with no front seat that could just filled there for the
Equipment.
Passenger side. Fill it with the driver had a seat.
Right.
So you drove out perhaps more than any of us, and spent a lot of time there. What did it mean to you?
Oh my. Well, first of all, Martha you cannot say no to Martha. Martha, I would never say no to you. But no, the energy was so amazing. I quit my job at a market. I was heading a marketing department. I'd never worked for anything but nonprofits. But I left that job and I said, I need to be there. And you left me a tent, thank you. And I lived there for 6 weeks, and it was so, I mean, I know we use empowering a lot, but it truly was. I mean, to have like we've talked about on the show, every woman there was doing something. It wasn't just, calling them in to fix stuff and all that. And I came from the same kind of patriarchal, family structure. So that was important. It also taught me courage. I was able to, in 1999, have some young people that got press passes for WTO in Seattle. And I always felt like that PeaCe encampment experience of being under pressure and filming and having all these angry guys and angry people really helped me see how important that was. And so, yeah, very important to
And
me.
obviously for the camp, it could attract people like the Congresswoman, but more importantly, really ordinary people from all across the country to come. It felt like people, Martha, were hungering for something then. I mean, those of us who are old enough and lived through the late 60s and early 70s had experienced a real anti-war movement and maybe the civil rights movement. And then things seemed to die out. And then the early 80s was kind of Reagan years, which wasn't really great for progressives. But this was a sort of a shining light, I think, in those Reagan years, perhaps because of the continued threat of nuclear destruction. But it also seemed like a maturing of the women's movement and the peace movement. How did you fit it into a kind of an historical context?
Well, from the time I was about 10 years old, I was terrified of nuclear weapons. And we used to practice at our school, get on your desk if there's a big flash of light, there's going to be a nuclear war. It was hanging over my head all through my childhood. And it was so big. I felt there was nothing I could do about that. Like, it couldn't be touched. It was too huge. And just about that time, I was living in a group house in Boston, and one of the people in our house went to this speak out, which I think was in Somerville, might have been Cambridge. And people got up and they talked about how they felt about nuclear weapons. And for the first time, it seemed like people could do something about it. People could say, this is terrible. This has to be stopped. So when the peace camp came along, it just seemed, okay. I wasn't active during the Vietnam War. I didn't know I couldn't understand it. I thought the government knew more than I knew, which was true. I mean, I knew so little. But when the time came to oppose nuclear weapons, it was clear. I mean, nuclear weapons were just ridiculous. And to put first strike nuclear weapons into Europe was an obscenity. So it was clear.
Well, I think that a lot of us who are similar age had very similar experiences in learning how to duck and cover. One thing that the PeaCe encampment did is it brought out a lot of hostility from some members of the local community. And we're going to go to a tape now of Barbara Deming, who is one of the foremost thinkers in this country of feminist thought and of nonviolence. She had gone to India and read about Gandhi and studied Gandhi, and she was very important. And she actually died a year after this, the summer. She died in '84, and this was tape footage we had of her. So it's one of the last interviews I think she might have done about analyzing the experience of why people were so angry with us. And I think she really understood it in an articulate way. So let's go to that tape of Barbara Deming.
They were saying, go home commies, go home Jews, nuke the lesbies. Sometimes they also said, kill the Jews, and let's see some blood. When they said, go home commies, most of them don't really know what communism is, but they saw another form of government. When they said, go home Jews, they saw another form of religion. When they said, nuke the lesbies, they saw another form of sexuality. And it's true, if you dissolve patriarchy, you change the form of government, the form of religion, the form of sexuality. So in a certain sense, they were very perceptive, even though they were out of their minds.
When you have hunger, there is war. Where you have ignorance, there is war. When you have squatter settlements and people eating out of garbage cans, as I see in my neighborhood, or people with no homes, or people dying of disease and lack of immunization and lack of food, well, then that is war. And that's why I say we must stop the deployment of the cruise and missiles
in Western Europe, not only this year, but any year. And I think it's important to understand that we can do it. But we must also realize that the missiles are already deployed in the barrios, in the ghettos, in the bantustans, in the occupied territories. So that's what we're talking about.
Oh, shit.
Welcome back to the studio. This is Laura Barrett. You've tuned into Dead Air Live. We're doing the PeaCe Encampment HeRSTory project. I guess we've run a couple of tapes together, but there's a lot to think about there with the Barbara Deming and also the person who we haven't been able to identify, but who has a lot of wonderful things to say. Martha, if you were able to hear, and I'm not sure technically if you're able to hear what was going on in the Barbara Deming interview, what do you think of her analysis of why people were so angry with the women?
Well, I think people were shocked. I mean, what is this? A whole group of women getting together and being powerful. In these days, it's kind of hard to think back 30 years and realize what the times were like then. We were raised to feel that we were equal, but we didn't experience it as adults. And so it's kind of like a surprise, I think, for a lot of us when we grew up, that things weren't as equal as we'd been told when we were kids. Nowadays, I don't know what people are experiencing. I think it's a lot easier for them, but there are still barriers.
Well, you know, there were a lot of intelligent women there. Every woman's intelligent, and every woman there had something to say. And I think some of the footage we've shown is making connections to broader issues. For example, there's the war and between the countries, and then there's also the war and the barrios. If that's some of the footage that they showed, was this about, how much was it about peace? How much was about justice? How much was about women's rights? Or was it about all of them for you, Claire?
I think it was about all of them. I mean, one of the interesting things was the Dead Air Live show that we did before, that Martha hosted, before we went to the PeaCe encampment. There were short clips of us talking about how as children we had been so impacted. And I think that took me back to being 5 and hearing, if the sirens went, I had to run home. So I think it came to go there from this really gut, place, because when you watch those videos, we all looked like little kids scared when we filmed ourselves. Anyway, so that was part of it, but also it was just about women can do everything, and I think that's what terrified. We just stepped out of our normal roles, and they had to react in some way, and that's scary.
Right.
That's really scary, and I also remember how scared I was sometimes to go into town. Right. But after being at the PeaCe encampment for a while, it went away, and I had this sense of, that we were supposed to be there, and it was going to be okay.
One of the wonderful stories, though, because we sort of focus on the negative reaction from the community, but there was one march, the famous Waterloo March, where the women decided to march, even though they didn't have a permit, but there was no permit to be gotten, it's my understanding at the time. And so some townspeople stopped them from marching, and so the women just sat down, and what I remember seeing from the HeRSTory project is that the wife of one of the leading bankers in town joined the women who were sitting down and was arrested with them too, because she said, I stand up for your rights to peacefully assemble and speak your minds. I mean, so I think there were connections made outside of people just in the encampment. It spread farther. I mean, and I think that was the point of why we did a video collective and why we wanted to tape it. We wanted it not just to be the 1,000 or so people that were at the camp, or a few hundred at a time, thousands over time. Was that your idea, Martha, of why we should tape it?
Absolutely. And on the first week that I was there was a big action, and it confirmed my worst fears, which was there was a broadcast television tape from Japan, a camera operator from Japan, a man, and a camera operator, I believe, from Germany, a man, and nobody from any of the channels in the United States. So it was internationally being broadcast, but not locally. And I said to my sister, I was going to the PeaCe camp, and she said, what's that? I haven't heard anything about that. Because she took her information from television, as people do. And it was like, like radio silence, and people didn't know about it.
So Claire, we produced a film that ended up being shown where? On PBS.
Yes, I remember
all over the world, actually.
But I just want to say something really quick about what Martha said, jump on it. What Martha said was so relevant because she said the mainstream media will not go. They won't go there. And this is, sometimes I think there was no cell phones. I don't know how we talked to each other. I mean, just to think about the communication piece was pretty astounding. But what you said was true. And so what we initially were going to do, I think, Martha, was to film, bring it back, and make sure cable stations had it. So the documentary sort of evolved. But initially, Martha, you were so right. They wouldn't have come, and they didn't, except when Bella Abzug came.
Yeah, so we produced this film that was shown and that we will be making available. It will be at the Schlesinger Library, and ultimately we'll get it out in the public more. We've had to revive it from its old 1-inch format, and this, if a camera operator can focus on this was a camera that we had won. And so but you'll learn more about that if you go to the PeaCe Encampment HeRSTory Project blog site and find out about all the events this weekend and all the footage. So good night to one and all, and thank you for tuning in.
I will be being the best human being I can be tomorrow. We are going to a peaceful world. Does anyone want to come with us? We are going to a peaceful world. Does anyone want to come along? And singing careless flowers, hail of sunshine, hail the water. Does anyone want to come along? We're getting it together.